For 1,000 years, nobody asked the obvious question. The clans had their names. Their origins were recorded, celebrated, passed down. The MacDonalds, the Campbells, the Gordons, the MacLeods. Their founding ancestors were known, or so everyone believed. Then genomic science did something history never could. It went further back. And what it found, beneath the medieval records, beneath the Gaelic chronicles, beneath every name and crest and clan motto, was a lineage that predated all of it by thousands of years. There is something about a Scottish surname that carries weight in a way other names simply do not. Say MacDonald, say Campbell, say Fraser or MacLeod or Graham. Even now, centuries removed from the people who first bore those names, there is something in them, some trace of hill and stone and blood, that refuses to dissolve entirely into history. For generations, the story seemed settled. Scottish clan identity was considered one of the better documented lineages in the Western world. Tartans were codified. Genealogies were preserved. Family trees were mapped, maintained, and proudly displayed. The clans had their crests, their mottos, their sacred glens, their ancestral castles still standing in the mist above Loch Ness and Loch Lomond. But here is the problem with a story that seems too complete. When geneticists began collecting surname-linked DNA from Scottish populations and comparing the results against ancient genomes recovered from burial sites across northern Britain, the Orkney Islands, Scandinavia, Ireland, and continental Europe, the picture that emerged was not the one the family trees had promised. It was older, it was wider, and in several cases, it was deeply, quietly shocking. This is not a story about doubt. It is a story about depth. Scotland's recorded clan system, as most people understand it, took formal shape somewhere between the 12th and 14th centuries. The great Highland clans, the MacDonalds who called themselves Lords of the Isles, the Campbells who expanded their territory with a combination of cunning and force, the Gordons of the Northeast, the Frasers of the Lowlands, emerged during a period when Scottish kings were consolidating power and Gaelic chieftains were formalizing their territories. The popular understanding is relatively clean. Clans descended from a common ancestor, often a medieval warlord or landowner, and the surname you carry today traces back directly to that founding figure. If your name is MacGregor, the story goes, you are descended from a man named Gregor. If your name is MacDonald, your blood runs back to a Gaelic lord named Domhnall. Historians, of course, have always known this picture was simplified. Non-related families regularly adopted clan surnames for protection. Tenants took their landlord's name as a sign of allegiance rather than ancestry. After the Jacobite defeat at Culloden in 1746, many clansmen changed their surnames entirely to survive. But even accounting for all of that known complexity, the DNA revealed something else, something older, something that no parish record, no genealogical registry, and no medieval charter had managed to capture. The first hints of something unexpected came not from surnames at all, but from ancient burial sites. Archaeologists excavating Neolithic chambered cairns across Scotland, some dating back more than 5,000 years, recovered mitochondrial DNA and, in some cases, Y chromosome sequences from the skeletal remains inside. When those ancient sequences were compared against modern Scottish populations carrying specific surnames, researchers noticed a pattern that did not fit the medieval origin story. Certain surnames clustered around haplogroups, ancient genetic lineages, that predated not only the medieval clan system, but the arrival of Gaelic language and culture in Scotland entirely. That was not a contradiction. It was a signal. It suggested that the founders of certain Scottish surnames may not have been the Gaelic-speaking warriors described in the medieval chronicles at all. In some cases, the Y chromosome signature associated with a particular clan surname pointed to a male lineage that had been present in northern Britain for 6, 7, perhaps even 8,000 years, long before anyone in those islands spoke a language remotely resembling what we now call Gaelic. The name changed. The ancestral blood, in some lineages, apparently did not. When surname-linked DNA projects, most prominently large-scale efforts coordinated through groups like the Scottish DNA Project and the National Records of Scotland's Genealogical Research Initiatives, began aggregating results from thousands of male-line participants carrying specific Scottish surnames. 3 broad explanatory frameworks began to emerge. The first was what geneticists call founder effect. Under this model, Many Scottish clan surnames do trace, in male line terms, back to a single founding patriarch. But that patriarch may have been a local chieftain whose ancestry was not Gaelic, Irish, or Norse, as the official histories claimed, but rather descended from Bronze Age or even Mesolithic populations who had inhabited Britain long before any of the historically documented migrations arrived. The second framework involved cultural adoption without genetic replacement. This model suggests that when Gaelic culture expanded into Scotland from Ireland and the Western Isles beginning roughly in the 5th and 6th centuries, what spread was primarily language, custom, and political structure, not a large-scale population replacement. Local men, already established in the landscape for centuries, adopted Gaelic names and identities without carrying Gaelic genetics. They became, in cultural terms, MacDonalds or MacLeods, while their DNA told a story reaching back to a much earlier world. The third, and perhaps most unsettling, framework was the ghost lineage interpretation. This is the possibility that the male line ancestors of some Scottish surnames belong to a population that has otherwise left almost no trace in historical record, a group that was neither Pictish, nor Norse, nor Irish Gaelic, but something distinct, something whose identity dissolved into later historical categories, while their DNA quietly persisted inside the very surnames that were supposed to represent those later cultures. If that third framework is correct, and researchers are careful to call it possibility rather than conclusion, it would mean that some of Scotland's most iconic clan names are, in a precise genomic sense, older than the clans themselves. If any of this is making you reconsider the history behind your own surname, you are not alone in that feeling. Subscribe, because what comes next is where the evidence gets genuinely difficult to explain. The study that crystallized these questions most sharply for the public was not a single dramatic paper published in a prestigious journal. It was a slow accumulation of results from surname DNA projects conducted over roughly 15 years, beginning in the early 2000s and accelerating sharply after 2015, when the cost of whole genome sequencing dropped dramatically. What those results collectively revealed was a pattern of asymmetry in some Scottish surnames, particularly those associated with the Western Isles and the far north. The Y chromosome data showed strong Norse influence, consistent with the historical record of Viking settlement in Orkney, Shetland, the Hebrides, and along Scotland's northwestern coastline from roughly the 8th to the 11th centuries. Surnames like Gunn, originating in Caithness and Sutherland, showed Y chromosome frequencies, pointing in significant percentages towards Scandinavian origins. That part fit the expected story reasonably well. But in other surnames, several associated with the ancient Pictish heartland of eastern and northeastern Scotland, and others from the Central Highlands, the Y chromosome signal pointed neither toward Ireland nor toward Scandinavia. It pointed toward a population with deep roots in Mesolithic and Neolithic Britain, a lineage that predated every documented historical migration into Scotland by thousands of years. And then came the twist that nobody had cleanly anticipated. Several surnames that Scottish tradition had always associated with Irish Gaelic origins, surnames whose founding mythologies explicitly trace a clan back to a chieftain who crossed the Irish Sea, carried Y chromosome haplogroups that were not particularly common in Ireland at all. They were instead British, ancient British. Their male line ancestry appeared to have been present in Britain, possibly continuously, since the late Mesolithic or early Bronze Age. Not Irish, not Norse, not Gaelic. British, in the oldest possible sense of that word. Stand for a moment in the Cairngorm Plateau in late October. The granite is the color of old bone. The wind comes off the summit with a sound like something being torn. Below you, in every direction, the glens fall away into darkness between the hills, and somewhere in those glens, some version of human being has been standing in almost exactly this spot for 10,000 years. Not continuously, not the same person, but the same unbroken line, father to son, carrying in their cells a sequence of nucleotides that no chieftain's decree, no political marriage, no battle, no famine, and no force renaming after Culloden ever managed to erase. The clans rose and fell. The names changed and were changed again. The tartans were codified in the 19th century, many of them essentially invented by the Romanticism of the post-Jacobite period, by novelists and painters, and a Scottish king's visit that transformed Highland culture into a kind of patriotic theater. But the Y chromosome remembers nothing of that theater. It only remembers the man. What does any of this mean for the people who carry these surnames today? For some, the revelation is quietly humbling. You believe you were descended from a great Gaelic warrior who crossed from Ireland in the 6th century, and that story may still be culturally true in every meaningful social and historical sense. But your male line DNA may tell a different story. A story of a man who was already in that glen before the Gaelic language existed, who adopted a new name when the culture around him shifted, whose descendants eventually became recognized members of a Scottish clan, while carrying, in their Y chromosome, the genetic signature of a world that had no clans, no tartans, no surnames at all. For others, the revelation opened something unexpected, the sense of belonging to a place that runs deeper than any recorded history can document. If researchers are correct that certain Scottish Y lineages trace back to populations in Britain before 5000 BC, then the ancestors of some Scottish surname bearers were standing in those mountains, fishing those rivers, and sheltering from those winters before the pyramids were built, before the wheel, before writing. The genome does not care about the clan system. It does not care about the Lords of the Isles or the Battle of Bannockburn or the Highland clearances. It carries only what it carries, a chain of biological inheritance stretching back through time with fidelity and indifference that no historian has ever quite matched. This does not mean the clan system was a fiction. History is not diminished by complexity. The social bonds of the clan, the shared language, the shared territory, the loyalty between chief and clansmen, were real. The culture they created was real. The suffering during the clearances, when landlords expelled thousands from ancestral glens in the 18th and 19th centuries, was devastatingly real. The diaspora that scattered Scottish names across Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the American South was real, and the longing those people carried for a homeland most of them would never see again was real. But what genetics is revealing, slowly and with appropriate caution, is that the story of who those people were, in the deepest biological sense, was always more layered than any single founding myth could contain. The Campbells were not purely the descendants of a medieval Gaelic warlord named Cailín Mór, however important he was to the clan's political identity. The MacLeods were not purely descended from a Norse chieftain named Leod, however accurately that Norse signal appears in some branches of the MacLeod Y chromosome data today. The Gordons, the Grahams, the Monroes, the Sinclairs, these surnames are not windows onto single ancestral moments. They are accumulations. They are the surviving labels on a human story that began thousands of years before anyone thought to give themselves a hereditary name. The map was always too small for what actually happened. DNA does not resolve the mystery of Scottish clan identity. If anything, it deepens it. It suggests that the people of Scotland, like every population that has ever been seriously studied through the lens of genomics, did not arrive from a single place, at a single moment, in a single movement. They accumulated. They layered. They absorbed and were absorbed. The Norse left their mark in Caithness and the Western Isles. The Irish Gaelic expansion left its linguistic and cultural stamp across the Highlands. The Bronze Age people who came from continental Europe, carrying new farming technologies and new metallurgical knowledge, reshaped the genetic landscape of Britain in ways that are still being mapped. And beneath all of that, persisting quietly inside certain male lineages through every wave, every conquest, every renaming, there may be men whose ancestry in these specific islands is simply ancient beyond any political category we have ever invented. The surname is modern. The clan is medieval. But the genome in some of these lineages may be as old as the mountains themselves. And perhaps that is the most Scottish thing about it. If stories like this one, where the evidence rewrites the map, are the kind of thing that makes you lean forward, subscribe. There's far more hidden in the human past than the official histories ever managed to record.